Hello again, everybody. This is Steve, coming to you with another intro to writing video. This one is on challenging yourself in writing. One of the things, or one of the practices of good writers is that they regularly go outside their comfort zone. Now, I'm not saying like go into something really creepy or soul eating or anything like that. What I'm talking about is, you'll have your key genre. Like my key genre is science fiction, but I also do Christian writing through my pocket guides. I have experimented with fantasy writing. I can do a decent job with that. It's definitely not my forte, but I can do that. Uh, and something I've recently started was, ironically enough, it was my nephew that kind of encouraged me to do this. Is I'm now starting to dive into first person writing or first person perspective writing. Uh, that's where you go in and you write as though you're telling somebody your life story. Maybe not telling it. Not maybe not actually telling your life story, but you are the character. As the writer, you are the character, and you are narrating the whole book from the perspective of the character. This dialogue, actions, everything. The character is literally telling you everything about what's happening. Uh, and this is different from second person. Second person is kind of a mixture of first and third. You've got third person perspective for the other characters, and then you've got the main character that the story is being told from their perspective, but there's third person characteristics to the story as well. Second person's a really hard one to write in as well, which is something that I also recommend you at least try. Even if you fail at it, the things you will learn are astounding. But yeah, like I say, and I'm starting just trying an experiment with first person perspective. So far, the feedback I've gotten on it is really good, so that's encouraging. Um, but it's things. What you want to do to challenge yourself is to go into something you're unfamiliar with. I like to say go into something you're uncomfortable with. For me, that's first person writing because that's not how I normally think as a writer. Because I'm usually envisioning it like you're watching a movie, which that's best done in third person. So this new one that I'm working on in first person is it's really forcing me to think in new ways, which I think will help me in other ways. Because like when I first started out and I wrote the Earthfleet saga, that was just textbook sci-fi. I can't call it hard sci-fi because hard sci-fi there is none of this transporters and warp drive and all that stuff. You're having it's like the Expanse. You're having to do gravity turns and there's inertia and all this other stuff, and you're working with kinetic weapons and stuff. That's hard sci-fi, true hard sci-fi. Me, I do what they call soft sci-fi, which is like the same thing as what Star Trek, Star Wars, Babylon 5, different ones like that are there. Well, Babylon 5 is probably a 50-50 between soft sci-fi and hard sci-fi, but because they do have hyperspace and some other things like that, so it's not pure hard sci-fi. Like the Expanse is pure hard sci-fi, but you got other ones that are like a mixture of them, like Babylon 5, Star Trek, Star Wars, my Earthly series. Those are soft sci-fi where they bring in a lot of sci-fi fantastical elements like transporters and warp drive, FTL, stuff like that. So like I said, that was where I started out, and that was the genre I was most comfortable with. Which if you're just starting out, that's perfect. Right in the genre you're comfortable with, get really good at it. After that, jump into something different. In my case, that was the Land of the Lions series because it's like Narnia meets sci-fi. It meets. I'm trying to think of a good example of what it is. But it's kind of got this Narnia style of writing, but it's done with sci-fi in mind because like the main characters are androids, Brakeman, Tagani, Yuteka, all of those lions like that. Uh, And then you've got other elements in there involving droids, and then you've got for the Narnia side of things, you've got the characters for good, which is Meshwa. You got the characters for evil, which is Nagago, Sagarg, and Regnig. And like I say, it's got that Narnia flavor to it. I'll say it that way. It's not like a sci-fi ripoff of Narnia, because it's not a one-to-one. Believe me, it is far from being a one-to-one, but it's got that style to it, is the way I'll put it. After that, my next challenge was the Offworld Chronicles. Now that was entirely different. That was survival science fiction, and that one was interesting from the standpoint that I had never done something like that. Because one of the things too about the other two series is, yes, they have a larger, broader story behind them, but each book is episodic. Like I say, there are longer ranging things like like the progression of the galaxy through through the first 4 books, the actual Earthfleet saga that started off that series, that world, that universe. Sorry about that. And like I said, there's there's a larger underlying story, but the books themselves are generally standalone. Land of the Lions was kind of the same thing. Each book was a standalone, but there was a larger story in the background playing out from book to book to book. Then once you get to the Offworld Chronicles, that was not episodic. That was the 7 books of Offworld Chronicles is basically a 700,000 word single standalone story spread across 7 books, because each of the 7 books is about 100,000, ranging from about 92 up to like 108. So it averages out to about 700,000 total words across the whole series. Now the 3-book epilogue trilogy after Offworld, that one you could say is episodic, but it's not so much episodic as it is siloed, because it's one great big story, but it's told in 3 parts. You have the part with Simon and his team, the second part with the Dragons of Offworld, and then the third part with Offworld itself as it's rising out of its primitive state that was forced on it by the controllers, and they start rolling forward into modernity. The planet changes. They don't have the controllers forcing the direction of the planet and how it's going to work and controlling everything and enslaving the people and stuff. The people are now free, so now there's this effort to grow, to modernize, to expand and stuff like that. So, don't worry, I'm not spoiling that book for you. I'm only giving you like the 50,000 foot view on it. Which you'll get the same basic idea from just reading the back cover. But those right there you could say are episodic, but they're siloed, which you can do when you're writing. If you've never done a series where it's the same story, 3 different perspectives, or 3 different groups in my case, that's another one that you can try. That's actually kind of fun, because like I say, you get to silo it into 3 different storylines, even though it's the same world, the same story, and the same events and everything, just told from 3 different perspectives. A friend of mine, he writes fantasy primarily. Fantasy, gamers novels. He does, what's one of the other books he does? He does model building books. He did a really, really good book on model building. He's done a couple other books. One of the ones he tried this took him years, because it was so far out of his normal scope of work, of writing, that it was like an extreme challenge for him, is Soccer Mom, which is essentially, it's a murder mystery. And he struggled with that one to get that right. And I can understand, because I've had a couple of my books where, like Gold Rush from the Offworld Chronicles, I had to completely rewrite that twice to get it right. Lion in the Fire, that one needed some major overhauling, a couple dozen times to finally get that right. And I do not joke when I say a couple dozen times. Now, it wasn't like the whole book, but there was some big sections in there that I had to do some major overhauling on because I struggled with that. And it wasn't like the book itself, it was getting that story right. And then there was other books that, I kid you not, I felt like I sat down on Tuesday, finished up on Wednesday, and the whole story was there and everything was perfect. Now, not literally, but that, the story just flowed. And then, of course, like I say, any of you who have been around and writing for a while, you know that some of those stories, they just pour out of you like a river of water, or raging rapids, or, dam burst or something, whatever you want to describe it. But, it just like flows out of you. And then there's other ones that just, I don't care how much you write, it just does not work. And you have to work and work and work, and then you finally get it right. And that's quite an accomplishment. And it, in its own way, that is a challenge. So you don't have to jump over to other genres to try that. You might have, you got an existing series and you try something different in that, and it really stretches you because you're struggling to get this right, but you learn from it. And that's primarily what I'm encouraging here. You want to do it in a way that you learn and you grow and you're challenged and you become better as a writer. And okay, yeah, I struggled at those. I fought working to try to get those right. But I would not trade that for anything, because I grew so much as a writer, because I was having to go in there and problem solve to get the book to have the right story, the right feel, to not feel clunky, to not feel stuttery or anything like that, to get everything exactly the way it needed to be. And sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's not. Depends on what you're dealing with. Like after Offworld, Simon's story on the first book called Homecoming. Yeah, there was a couple sections in there, especially when I'm trying to think of the guy from section 9. I can't remember his name, but he's in the series. If you read the series, you'll know who I'm talking about. He comes and visits Simon, and it took me, I don't even know how many times, writing it and rewriting it to try to get the explanation right without being clunky or awkward or over-explained or under-explained, etc. like that, for what exactly happened to Simon and his team on the planet. Because that one, I knew what I wanted to say, but the nerd in me kept trying to go Urkel the whole way through it, and I'm like, no, because then I'm just going to lose everybody. So how do I write this in a way that I'm not going to have people's brains melting down while they're reading it? So that was a big challenge for me, but I got through it. I enjoyed it. It was fun, and I got a good end result. But yeah, like I said, it took me quite a few times, but it was a challenge that was worth it. But anyways, going back to my friend and his soccer mom novel. Like I say, he did the research, he did the digging, he wrote and he wrote and he rewrote and he rewrote, and he was so challenged by that. And yet he brought out just an amazing book, but he poured into that so much trying to get that right. And in the end, he came out of it with a good book, and he came out of it as a better writer. And that I think is the big drive here. If you don't challenge yourself, you'll never be a better writer. One of the experiments I did, above and beyond the ones I've already told you about, was the short story Jenna's Journey. Now, I've seen a lot of people look at that and go, I don't want to read that. That's just stupid. No, I actually encourage you to read it. And I'm not saying that like, hey, go buy my book. I'm saying it because of the style in which this is written in. And I wrote it once. I enjoyed the challenge. I will not write it in that style again. It's that challenging. But I also, at the same time, encourage you to try this style, because you will learn story management in spades. Trust me. It is it's one of those, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't. But at the same time, I would, because I learned so much by doing this. And you're probably over here going, okay, so what was the style of Jenna's Journey that has you so excited about it? Have you ever heard of split narrative? There's other names for it, but I call it a split narrative. Basically what it is the story is told in two parts. The first part is told through a series of short stories that gives you the perspective of the supporting characters. Like it tells the story, but from their perspective. The second half is told from the perspective of the main character. And you get to, as their story is unfolding, you look at these seemingly disconnected short stories at the beginning and you see what she's going through, and all of a sudden, oh, this is where this guy connects into her experience as she's going down the road, or oh, she's here and went through this, and this character was involved, and this is their part. And and it's just like being in real life, where you're either the main character and other people are interacting with you, or you're the other people who are interacting with the main character. It's essentially that. But the thing is, you can't just write it like a normal story. You have to reconcile both parts, and that's where it really gets challenging, because the normal behavior of a writer is to, how do I say this? You're going to want to get creative with different things as you go further along, like, that doesn't work and this doesn't work and stuff like that. But in this, you're forced to, I can't say like shoehorn yourself into a single channel, but what you have to do is both parts of the narrative, silly yawns, the both parts of the narrative, the supporting character and the main character, those narratives have to align. And it sounds like it would be really easy, but it's really not, because those two stories, the main story with the main character and the short story with the supporting character, they're going to have different minds. They're going to have different natures. They're going to have a different flow to them. It may be subtle, but they're going to have a different flow because it's different people and different characters. And that creates an added challenge to try to balance those and get those right. And, like I say, it's not an easy one. I'm going to admit that up front. It's not an easy genre, or not an easy style to write in, but it's worth it. Because that is, like I say, that will stretch you like you wouldn't believe. Another one that'll stretch you, going back to Offworld Chronicles, is to write a super series. Because the bigger your story gets, the harder a time you have maintaining continuity and avoiding plot holes and errors in your story. And okay, this has changed over time, that's changed over time. What was true here is not true anymore. You're going to get story drift. That's just a thing. Especially the bigger the story gets, the more likely you are to have story drift. Story drift is where something was true at the beginning, later on in the story it's less and less true, or it changes, but not an intentional change. It's just, that's kind of, the story will drift off course. It'll drift off the road and into the ditch if you're not careful. A super series, for anyone that doesn't know, is 5 books or more. Because you have single standalone books. You have a I don't know if it's duality or what name it has for when you have 2 books in a series. 3 books in a series is a trilogy. 4 books is a quadrilogy. 5 or more is a super series. Usually, though, you really can't call it a super series until it hits 7 books. But I call it, a super series at 5, because once you hit 5 books, you're already got your hands full. And I'm not talking like you write 7 books in the same universe. I'm talking it's the same story across 7 books. Because like in Earthfleet, like I said, all those had a background story, an overarching story that spans all the books. But the main story in each one is episodic. So, in Offworld Chronicles, it's not. It's all one continuous story. Like if I was to take the stories out of, like Earthfleet, put them all into one book, let's say just the Earthfleet saga, it would end up being 4 prime sections. One big book, but 4 prime sections, 4 separate stories. With Offworld Chronicles, you take the 7 stories out of that, put it into one book, it's still one book. It's not like one book in 4 parts. It's all one book, all one story. So those I recommend writing. And those, like I say, you're going to need to do a lot of planning and take a lot of care as you're writing, because, like I say, those are really subject. The bigger the story gets, the more they're subject to story drift. And here's one too that's actually a good way to stretch you as a writer. If you're heavy into sci-fi, go into obviously if you're heavy in sci-fi, go and write something in fantasy. If you're big into fantasy, go write something in sci-fi. But the one I was thinking of here, though, is writing not just outside your genre, but outside your style. Uh, and by that I mean, like, say you've got a favorite author. Let's say your favorite author is Tolkien. Just use him as an example. You don't have to write a whole novel. Maybe write a short story, 5, 10, 15, 20,000 words in the style of Tolkien. Maybe Larry Niven. I mean, of course, if you guys know me, I love the old authors. Larry Niven, Clive Cussler, Tolkien, Orson Scott Card, those guys like that. The old school authors, Arthur C. Clarke, and so on and so forth. I love those guys. And when I first started out, I was writing, I didn't publish them, I didn't release them. I wrote them just for the practice, but I would sit down and try and write stories in the style of somebody else, just to see if I could copy their style. And in copying their style, which it sounds easy, but it's not. But in the process of that, you learn things. You realize, oh, that's why they did this. Oh, that's why this is. And oh, I like how this flows. I'm not going to like copy him one-to-one on this style, but I will take the things I learned from it and use it to enhance my own style. Because you want your style to be unique. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't go out and read other authors and learn from them how they did it, where they did it right, where they did it wrong. Why did their style work for them? And like I said, one of the things too about writing in different styles is it makes you think. It's not automatic. You're not just auto penning stuff down on the page. You're actually having to think and feel and understand and get behind the eyes of the author that you're trying to emulate, and it will open your eyes. You will see things you didn't see before. Another good one to get into, which may sound a little odd for those of you who like fiction writing, write something in nonfiction. I've done 4 books. One of them's out of print, but 4 books. All Christian pocket guides, obviously, but 4 books that were nonfiction. They were, I wouldn't call them self-help. They're pocket guides, which is, they're a guide for the reader in spiritual things. I did those, and that's a whole different way to write it. I mean, some people hate that because, oh yeah, now I'm just writing a term paper, and I hated term papers. Well, good, so did I. But when I wrote those books, I was able to, I wrote those books to help people. And in the process, I learned a lot. I mean, that really opened my eyes. And that's another one that you got to be very, very organized at. Now, and the thing is, when I first started out, I just kind of winged it, and ooh, that's a bad way to start out. That is a really bad way to start out, because it took me way more work than needed to be to get everything right because of that. Since then, I have learned that, and I'll cover this in a different video, but I've learned that when you're writing something technical, you're writing something nonfiction, something that's fact-based, something that's like a help guide, like what I wrote. You're writing about history, you're writing about real world events. There we go. Tongue got tied. You're doing things like that. Maybe you're writing about history and stuff. The key to being successful on that, and to successful right off the bat, is copious, detailed notes. And I will stress that again. You need copious, detailed notes with that. Now, where this plays back into your preferred genre is, if you get your notes right there in the nonfiction stuff, you're going to be making better notes in your fiction stuff. And like, since having to work on this latest book that I've got on the deck, The Biblical Use of Lots, which is my next book. You guys will love, for those of you who are Christians, you will love this book. It's really informative. It's been fun to research. It's been fun to detail out. It's going to be fun to write once I finally get going with it. If you don't know what lots is, that was the old school name for dice. And There's a lot more explanation to that, so I'll leave that out for right now. But it's another pocket guide. It'll be my 5th pocket guide, 4th one in print, because like I say, the first pocket guide is not print anymore. But the things I've learned for notes since writing that very first pocket guide to what I have now is like night and day. I mean, I could literally hand that set of notes to somebody who knows nothing on the topic, and they could write the whole book for me. They're that good. They're that detailed. That's the kind of notes you need to eventually build up to. Don't expect that you're going to have that right away. That's a learning experience. One of the things, too, that I think really helped me with my notes was the Magefall series. Yeah, that got abandoned. I admit that. Because when it came down to brass tacks, of course, God had a little say in this, but when it came down to brass tacks and I actually started trying to convert my notes into the story and into the actual books, the notes were great. The story, I'll leave it at that. It's kind of one of those burn it with fire things. So anyways, the notes were great. I thought I had so much fun writing the notes, but then I got in and tried to convert that over, and I realized, this probably isn't the book I should be writing. I guess God's right on this one, which, I mean, he's always right. But the thing is, though, if you look at my notes going through that series, because I created, let's see. I think I created not 900. I think it was, let's see, what was my last head count? It was over 600. Yeah, it was 600, about 650 at last head count. And I know there were more beyond that, so we'll probably say a comfortable 700. I had the notes for 700 short stories. And if you look at the stories at the very beginning in book 1, when I was writing those, compared to the notes I had at the end, the detail in the notes is night and day compared to the beginning. The beginning was like a guy came in, did this, and left. And that was basically the extent of the notes. And then I had to fill everything else in, which really, I used to do that a lot, and it wasn't too big of a problem when I was younger because my imagination was so vivid that I could take that little prompt that I had for my notes and do a huge amount of stuff with it. Now that I'm 53, it's more a case of I have to write the notes to such an extent that it's not quite a one-to-one between the notes and what ends up in the story, because the notes are basically the outline of how the narrative runs, but it doesn't include the the depth, the color, the descriptions, things like that. It's still lacking a lot, but I'll tell you this much: those, just like with the biblical use of lots, those notes are so detailed now that literally I could hand them to somebody else and they could write the whole story for me just using the notes. They may not be a perfect copy of what I would write, but the point is they're extremely good notes. And it's kind of, if you're a programmer or developer, you understand the statement of documenting your code. Well, this is kind of the same idea. It's you're not documenting your code, you're documenting your ideas. And the more detail you can put into your notes, short of actually writing them out as a story, the better you'll do, because it allows you to see your thought process. And just because you plot it all out in these notes and it's in a certain way, and you're doing like, I've got all this, and here's how this scene looks, and here's what the characters say and everything. Understand that those notes are notes. They're a guide. They're going to get you started. And as I like to famously say, no outline ever survives the rough draft, because when you start writing, you're going to realize that parts of your notes suck or they don't work. Or once you start getting in and you're building the color and the feel and the foundation and all this, you're going to realize what parts actually work and what don't. But at the same time, when you have the idea, write it down. Now, if the idea is just charging forward like a runaway stallion or a freight train, feel free. I'm just having a horrible time tonight. Feel free to cliff note it, but then come back and flesh it out. And if the idea is kind of slow in progressing, then take each of your little bullet points, each of your sections, flesh them out, move on to the next one. It's whatever you have to do to get the desired end result for your story. Do that. But like I say, the more detail you have, the better off you'll do. And again, understand that you're not going to necessarily have your notes match your story one-to-one, because like I say, once you start getting into it, you're going to realize what part of the notes actually work, what part don't. So don't feel bad if some of your notes end up getting thrown in the trash. That happens with me. But anyways, that right there, doing really, really good notes. And like I say, I'm going to cover it more detail elsewhere or in another video, but the better your notes, the better you'll do. So that's another thing you can challenge yourself in, is to get better and better notes. And yes, that's fire engines and stuff you're hearing. They've been going all day. I don't know what's going on, but it sounds like the city's falling apart. But anyways, that being said, I think that's all I need for tonight. Yeah, they've been running fire engines and police cars by here all day, and like numerous ones. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. Anyways, that's all for this particular episode. I'm really hoping that you like this. I do still have a handful of other episodes in this series before I run out of topics. If you have something you would like me to talk on, please let me know. Comment on the video, like, subscribe. I'll give that normal disclaimer, but comment on the video. Say, I would love you to talk about this. I'd like to have you do a walkthrough on this. I'd like to have you do a live broadcast, maybe, because I'm looking at doing live broadcasts, and we can sit down and we can do say like a workshop on world building. If a live broadcast doesn't work for you, if you have Discord, we can do a Discord roundtable where I can walk through with you how to world build. We can bounce ideas off of each other and try out ideas. Does this sound good? Does this not sound good? Where might I, what might be the hang-ups, the trip-ups, and stuff like that with this particular idea, so on and so forth. So, like, if you have those ideas, if you have things you want to do, let me know. Like I say, we can do chat rooms, we can do voice chat, we can do video chat, whatever works for you, to get that design, to get those lessons, that training, that teaching, that I can take my 33 years of doing this and share it with you, share what I've learned, how I've grown, things for you to consider, things for you to watch out for, and so forth like that. So if you have ideas for that, things you want to hear, let me know. I'd be more than happy to do videos on those and share the knowledge that I have from all my time working in this field as a writer. So anyways, that's all for this time. I'll catch you guys in the next video.